Good evening and welcome to episode 54 of the Jacksonian from yours truly, Jackson Johnson. And I have the Ohio State beat writer from Bucknuts247 at 247Sports, the one and only himself, Patrick Murphy, as we'll be going over quite a lot about the takeaways from the Ohio State-Nebraska game, the Arvell Reese targeting call that happened on Saturday and how it got overturned earlier today, Penn State, Ohio State, the 2024 season, and much, much more. And I'm going to tell you right now, folks, it's going to be a wild ride. How you doing today, man?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, man. For those who don't know about you, would like to learn a little more about how you cover the Ohio State Buckeyes or, other sports, would you like to tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I've been covering Ohio State full time since 2015. I was an intern before then at a small outlet, moved to 247Sports towards the end of the 2016 football season, and have done football, basketball since then. I've done some other stuff outside of that, but what people, I'm sure, that listen to your show care about is football. And it's been fun. Got to cover college football playoff games. I covered a national championship game when Ohio State lost to Alabama, but I wasn't there because that was the COVID year and we could only send one person. So I didn't get to cover that one in person. Didn't get to cover 2014 either. I was at home because I was interning then. So still gotten to cover some big games. It's been exciting, including a few weeks ago out at Oregon, which was obviously, despite Ohio State losing that game, pretty cool experience.
Yeah. Well, just let you know that the Jacksonian is not just it looks like a football show, but it's basically an everybody show where it's really about the guests. And you, my friend, are the star of the show. I'm just the host.
I appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome. I remember watching like Alex Trebek say something once on Jeopardy where, he didn't like being called the star of the host. He just wanted to be referred to as the host because the contestants were the stars of the shows. Same with the audience.
Yeah, I buy it for sure.
There we go. And Saturday, speaking of which, that was a wild day. Ohio State, Nebraska, like water bottles were thrown. I mean, there was all kinds of stuff getting thrown all over the place on the stadium. What was going on for the Buckeyes this Saturday?
Yeah, it was a weird one. I mean, even before the game started, Ohio State the team all arrives at, it used to be the old basketball arena. Now they use it for like some volleyball, and I'm not even sure what all they use it for, but it's right down the street from Ohio Stadium, and they do what they call the skull session there with the band, and fans can come, and usually a coach or a player talks beforehand. I was not there for that one this week, but I was told Ohio State arrived late. Like there was clearly some frustration about their bus getting over there. So I'm not really sure, but from the get-go, it seemed like kind of a weird day. And then obviously, people know what happened to Ohio State. Nowhere near covering the spread 21-17, and just a game that, I don't know, it felt weird throughout. Nebraska fumbles the opening kickoff. Bad field position for the Cornhuskers, 3 and out, bad punt. It's like, all right, here's Ohio State coming off a loss, coming off 2 weeks to prepare. Okay, you get the ball at, what was it? Nebraska's 28-yard line, and they went 4 and out, turning the ball over on downs, and not able to take advantage of that situation. They have to punt on the next drive before finally scoring. And it's like, okay, here's where they're going to take off. Well, it was 14-6 at halftime. Buckeyes come out in the third quarter and don't score the entire 15 minutes. Have to wait until the fourth quarter when they've gone down 17-14 to finally get the touchdown, and then they get an interception late. You mentioned the targeting call. We can get into that if you want, but it was, just a weird game. I think Ohio State really hadn't had one of those where, other than obviously the loss to Oregon, but one of those games where you just don't look right. And this was certainly that. Now, how that plays out with next week at Penn State, we'll see. But I think, if you're a Buckeye fan, you're probably much happier that they won the game despite not playing well than if they'd lost that game. And now, obviously, you're going to Happy Valley with 2 losses.
Well, you covered Arvell Reese, the targeting call, and Brian Day was pretty much like he was like so mad that it was basically like Donald Duck just breaking the house, just like ripping out a power cord. Like, man, was that mad?
Yeah, I was down on the field at that point, and we were right by the Ohio State bench. So I had a front row seat for Ryan Day's displeasure, we'll call it, with the referees on that play. It was also, aside from the targeting call, it looked like it might have been a fumble as well. That was obviously not what was held up. The targeting call was confirmed. Arvell Reese was ejected, and then just not long ago, before we started recording this, Ohio State released that they appealed to the Big Ten, who ran the rule up the ladder, and it was deemed the incorrect call. So Arvell Reese won't be suspended for the first half against Penn State. Obviously, that doesn't change anything for what happened in the game. The Cornhuskers still got 15 yards. Arvell Reese wasn't on the field. Now, Arvell Reese, I don't know how much he would have played those last, however many plays it was after the penalty. He's kind of their third linebacker, and they often play two linebackers unless they're going up, against a team that's gonna, more traditional looks and run the ball and whatnot. So he may not have been on the field, but he might have. And it ended up fine. Ohio State gets the interception. Jordan Hancock picking off Dylan Raiola. But just imagine if that was the situation. Nebraska goes down the field, scores a game-winning touchdown, and then the Big Ten comes out a couple days later and says it was the wrong call. I don't imagine people in Columbus would be nearly as forgiving as they are today with the fact that Ohio State won.
Yeah. Well, and you talked about a little bit about the offensive line not looking so good this year. That's been one of the weaknesses, but are there any other weaknesses we need to look out for when they go against Penn State, and the strengths that we need to look out for?
Yeah, the offensive line is certainly the big one, especially on offense. It was starting to look a lot better. In the Oregon game was probably one of the better games, at least to start. And then Josh Simmons, the left tackle, who had been playing really well, gets hurt. Looks like a knee injury. Ohio State hasn't specified, but he's done for the season. So they had to go to Zen Mikulski, who played, I thought, decently well in that Oregon game, given the fact that you weren't expecting to step in there in the first half, and you're playing in a crazy environment. But then on Saturday, especially in the first half, and I don't know if it was nerves or what it was, but he did not look like a player who had 2 weeks to prepare. I was just rewatching back some of the game before we started recording, and that first half, he's getting beat regularly. Now, he did make some good plays as well. Obviously, we don't highlight those as much because it's not the play where he gets beaten, and so it's not as easy to point it out. But I do think that he did settle in a little bit in the second half, but then he gets hurt as well. So now Ohio State's going to have to figure out something different to do at left tackle yet again. We'll see what that looks like going into Penn State. But if we're talking about other areas that may be of concern, I think Buckeye fans still have some concerns with the linebackers. It was a better game, a better performance from Cody Simon, the middle linebacker, Sonny Styles, and then obviously we already talked about Arvell Reese. But still, I think combined, they missed 3 tackles. It's just been a trend with these guys missing some tackles. And, you're going against Penn State next week, who may be starting their backup quarterback, who's much more of a dual threat. You're going to have to worry about that. You're going to have to worry about 2 talented running backs and getting those guys down. So, it's maybe nitpicking a little bit because I do think the linebackers have played fine. But if you're trying to look, especially on the defensive side, for an area where you may be concerned, I think that's one spot. The defensive line went through a series of criticisms after the Oregon game, not getting a sack on Dylan Gabriel. They looked much better, I thought, against Nebraska, doing some different things, some different fronts. So it was an improved performance. But coming out of that loss to Oregon, going into the off weekend, the test wasn't expected, at least, to be Nebraska. It was going to be that next game against Penn State, where you see if in another big time game, if Ohio State has kind of figured some things out.
Well, and if Drew Aller is able to play against Ohio State, the question is going to be whether he can win the big one, because he has not been able to win the big one so far for Penn State. And maybe it's just me, but I've been thinking about this comparison. You know how we talk about how Kirk Cousins can't quite win the big one on primetime in the NFL?
Yeah.
Are we seeing those comparisons for Drew Allard, or is it just throwing the baby out with the bathwater?
Yeah, well, this will be his opportunity. Obviously, last year being a first-time starter, I don't think, from what I saw of Penn State, that the coaching staff did a ton to help him, especially the game at Ohio State. It felt like the offense was just kind of neutered at points. I think they've looked much better this year with a new offensive coordinator, more creativity. So this is the opportunity if he's able to go. Obviously, he's motivated. He's an Ohio kid who was kind of a late recruit for Ohio State, but had already committed to Penn State. So this is a big game for him. It was a big game last year when they came to Columbus. I think it's funny that the kind of narratives that we build, right, about these guys. You know, the talk has been after the Oregon loss, can Ryan Day win against top 5 teams? He's 2-7. I think you can go back. Kirby Smart, before he wins a national championship, it was a similar conversation with him. James Franklin struggled to get over the top against Ohio State and Michigan. So you got to do it, right? That's
Jim
the only way.
Harbaugh's another one.
Yeah, Jim. Yeah, until it happened. So you got to get it done. And from both of these coaches, the players, you want to get rid of that narrative. Go out and win this game on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean that would be huge for the Buckeyes to win against Penn State again. Because I mean, the last time Penn State has beaten Ohio State was in State College, obviously, with that blocked field goal touchdown return by Penn State in 2016. Chris Fowler, Kirk Herbstreit were on the call on ABC. And in 2011, we saw Penn State. That was the last time Penn State beat Ohio State in Columbus. And I mean, I don't think Penn State is going to be beating Ohio State and Columbus anytime soon. That's just not happening. But yeah, the rest of the season, I can't help but feel like the Buckeyes are definitely going to have to win out to get to the Big Ten title game, of course, but they have to go at least 10-2 to get in the playoffs. Which I mean, it's a manageable schedule. I mean, Purdue's not going to really challenge anybody. I mean, I know that the network announcement has not been announced yet for Ohio State Purdue, but if I had to take a guess, that's going to be on the Peacock app.
Yeah, quite possibly. Like if we're looking beyond the Penn State game, I think Indiana is interesting, right? With the way that the Hoosiers have played this year. And I know they're probably not getting national buzz, but it's an interesting team. It's a fun team. Kurt Signetti, the new head coach, has been he's been a winner everywhere he went. When we were at Big Ten Media Days, that was the way he kind of introduced himself to everybody, was, he was going to win because that's all he knows how to do. And, Hoosiers are undefeated. They just beat the same Nebraska team that Ohio State had some struggles with convincingly in Bloomington. They won again this past week without their starting quarterback. So I think down the road, that's one Ohio State will certainly have to be ready for. And then obviously there's the big game at the end of the season against Michigan, who, despite the fact that they have not had a good season coming off that national championship and a lot of turnover there, it's still a game that, one of those rivalry games, right? You throw the records out, you just never know. And Michigan's obviously won 3 straight against the Buckeyes. So that one isn't one you just take for granted, assuming that Ohio State's going to win it. But yeah, you're right. Northwestern, Purdue, not games that you would think would challenge Ohio State. So if you can get through this Penn State game, you've got a couple weeks there to kind of get things rolling again before you face those final 2 opponents.
That is going to be pretty cool that you get to play in Wrigley Field. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to going there. I have never been in Wrigley. I have seen a baseball game. They do like these bars on rooftops with stadium seating across the street, so you can see most of the game. Can't see all of it, but that's the only time I've ever seen a Cubs game in Chicago, at least. So yeah, I'll be interested to get to Wrigley and kind of check that out when we cover that game.
Well, we know the Jeff Brom days are not coming back, and the Joe Tiller days are all gone for Purdue. I mean, nobody's going to be intimidated by Purdue, but all the same, take it from me as an Alabama fan. Do not treat every game like it's the easiest. Don't ever do that. It will bite you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't, as we just saw on Saturday with Ohio State and Nebraska, you can't be looking ahead. You can't overlook teams. Obviously Ohio State was able to win the game, but there was a point there in that fourth quarter when Nebraska takes the lead and you're you're starting to say, well, things are getting a little nervy here. So, yeah, you've got to take every team seriously. Just a couple weeks ago, Purdue, I know the final score doesn't look great against Oregon, but Friday night in West Lafayette, they actually played a pretty good game. Now they lose 35-0. They struggled to get the ball in the end zone, but it wasn't a bad performance, watching the game back. So this isn't a team, despite their record, that is absolutely awful. They only have one win, and it's against Indiana State, but they've been in some other games. And like I said, if Ohio State is looking too far ahead, you could catch yourself in a ball game that you don't want to be in.
Agreed. I mean, the Ohio State Indiana matchup on the week before rivalry week, that to me looks like a toss up. And if Indiana, the last time Indiana beat Ohio State at all was on October 8th, 1988, where they won 41-7 in the first year of the John Cooper era. But the last time they beat the Buckeyes in Columbus was on October 10th, 1987, where they won 31-10. But the last time Ohio State, Indiana didn't result in a win for the Buckeyes was in 1990, which ended ultimately in a 27-27 tie on October 13th, 1990.
Yeah, there was a game in 2020. Now, obviously, that was a weird year where Indiana came to the Horseshoe, and it was a real close game. That was probably as good of an Indiana team as the Hoosiers have had in some time up until this year. So this will certainly have more of a feeling like that. Now, it being 2020, there were no fans in the stands and whatnot. I think if this game were in Bloomington, probably even more interesting. The fact that it's in Columbus probably gives the edge to Ohio State. I have watched a decent amount of Indiana this year just because of the timings of some of their games. And I think, probably not just in terms of overall talent, probably doesn't have anywhere near what Ohio State does, but top of the depth chart talent, there are certainly some players there. A good amount of transfers that came in this offseason. Quarterback from OU, Rourke, is a talented player if he's back healthy. So this is not your normal Indiana football team. They have done some things this offseason that have kind of put them in place to have success. Whether they thought they would be undefeated at this point in the season heading into November, I'm not sure, but I think they certainly have earned the right to be at this point.
Yeah, I don't think anybody thought Indiana would be unbeaten. I mean, it's like I predicted them to go 5-7, unfortunately, but it's like, oh, that was a bad prediction on my part. Like, nice.
Yeah, no one was picking Indiana to be, in contention for the Big Ten and maybe even a college football playoff if things go right. And look, they still have some tough games before they play Ohio State, so we'll see what the records are when they get there. But I do think this Indiana team deserves to get some national recognition. I saw there were some articles over the past few days kind of calling them for real. And I think they are. They're not winning a national championship, I don't think, this year. I think even if they made it to the Big Ten championship game, if it were against, say, an Oregon or a Penn State, those teams are probably still more talented. But you never know in a one-game play, one-game neutral site venue type of thing, what could happen. But certainly moving things in the right direction for a Hoosiers program that has not had a lot of success in football the last, you just kind of listed the years that the last time they were good, and it was way back.
I do my best. I do my best to list everything because, I mean, it's my job. But, oh, man, it's going to be a wild ride for the rest of 2024 because, I mean, I can't help but feel like it's 2007 2.0.
Yeah, it certainly could be. And look, then we get a 12-team college football playoff at the end of it, right? Which we'll see we don't know what to expect from that. But I think we'll have some more big-time matchups, obviously. And I'm excited. Obviously covering Ohio State, I hope the Buckeyes are in the mix just so I get to be a part of it. But just to watch it as a college football fan, I think will be a lot of fun. I think even the end of the regular season, there will be more games that probably wouldn't get attention that will, because there will be teams right around that, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 seeds that are going to be looking to get in the playoff, which will be fun to watch.
Oh, yeah. It's like the first round, it's basically like a few days before Christmas. So it's kind of like, well, there's college football playoff games. There's NFL games. I feel like a kid on Christmas.
Yeah, it'll be fun. I think it's interesting the number of sports that now play around these holidays. Didn't used to be the case. Gives you something to do, kind of, if you're with family on Christmas or whatnot. Well, let's throw the game on in the background, right? So, and you've got some options now that around that time. So, yeah, I'm excited to see how it all works out. Who knows what they'll do with college football's postseason in the future, whether it expands or they keep it at 12 or whatnot. But I think it'll be fun this year to at least see what it's like for the first 12-team playoff.
Oh, it's gonna be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what goes on. Something I've always thought to myself that I know that a lot of people are going to be talking about. Oh, well, who's going to have the first round buys? Well, just remember, like you and I both know it, but some people that are watching this, they need to realize that just because you're a top 4 seed does not mean you're automatically going to win it all. Because I mean, we've seen a lot of NFL football in our time, NBA, basketball, MLB. Just because you're the 1 seed or the 2 seed does not mean you're a champion.
Yeah, it's certainly going to change things. Even the 14 playoff, I think you saw some of that. It just in terms of, Ohio State in 2014, obviously they were the 4 seed, able to win those 2 games and win the national championship. So I don't know where, and I think it'll be, when we have more data on the college football playoff with this many teams, kind of where the cutoff will be. Because I do think at some point there will be a talent gap, right? And, is it 8? Is it 10? Where you're probably not going to be able to overcome multiple opponents with more talent. So we'll see, though. That's why they're going to play the games. And like you brought up the NFL. I mean, I think of like those New York Giants teams that maybe weren't the higher seeds, but went on the run, beat the Patriots twice. So including the undefeated Patriots, right? So you can certainly do it. Obviously, the NFL is a little different than college football, but I think there will be upsets, no doubt about it, and that'll make fun. It won't be quite March Madness, but I think it'll have some of that feel.
Agreed. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, we don't know who's going to pull off the upset, but there's going to be some Christmas magic for sure.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
Yeah, and you saw the rest schedule, and what would you say your record prediction would be for Ohio State? Can they win out the rest of November? And can they win the Big Ten?
Yeah, I need to look a little bit more at Penn State this week. I'm not sure coming off of the game last week. Like, it's a hard one to pick, right? Ohio State, Penn State. The fact that it's a noon game, like to me, that's probably the one potential stumbling block for Ohio State. If the Buckeyes can get through that game, yeah, the Indiana game will be interesting. I think the Hoosiers will present some issues. Obviously, the Michigan rivalry game. Both those are at home, though, for Ohio State. So I think the Buckeyes can handle the rest of the way, assuming you get out of State College with a win. And I think that is very much still up in the air, given the way these two teams have played. Now, we didn't really talk about it, but Penn State didn't have the best game last week. Now, they were on the road at Wisconsin at night. Quarterback got hurt. They had a defensive lineman get hurt. So certainly neither of these teams are coming in on their best form. Even a couple weeks ago, Penn State had to make a big comeback at USC. They've struggled to kind of get going quickly in halves. So if you're Ohio State, if you can get that offensive line play figured out and you can get out to a good start against Penn State on the road, quiet that crowd a little bit, I think you probably feel pretty good about your chances. But if Penn State comes out, especially if maybe you don't know which quarterback's going to start and there's a bit of a surprise there, this should be one of the games in college football, not just this week, but across the season, I think.
Yeah. Well, and Ohio State, Michigan, of course, that'll be coming up on rivalry week, of course. And we're going to hear it all over about how Ryan Day cannot get it done against Michigan. He's in a lot of trouble over that. But let's not forget, there's been numerous coaches that couldn't do so hot on rivalry week, in years past, like before our time. Like Eric Parsegian, he had 3 wins. Like he led Notre Dame to 3 wins against USC, 1965, 1966, 1973. Dabo Swinney only had 2 wins against Steve Spurrier from 2008 to 2014.
Yeah.
When Spurrier was leading South Carolina. And I know that Ohio State, Michigan is bigger than those rivalries. But that's a little something for people to really think about.
Yeah, it's funny the kind of narrative with Ryan Day. He came in 2019, takes over for Urban Meyer. They beat Michigan. 2020, the game obviously doesn't happen because of COVID. And so, there wasn't this narrative that he couldn't win the big game at that point. He'd beaten Michigan. You lose a close one to Clemson, the college football playoff that year in 2019. You get to the national championship. Obviously, they lose badly to a really talented Alabama team. So going into 2021, I think Buckeye fans were very pleased with what Ryan Day was doing in the direction of the program and all that. But then the losses in the rivalry games start, and some of it you can talk about the Connor Stallion stuff. I think last year was two really good teams playing each other, and the home team ended up winning the game. It wasn't like the 2 years prior where it was a blowout for Michigan. So, Ryan Day certainly needs to get that monkey off his back, but it is funny how quickly these things can change in terms of the perspective we have on, like we said earlier, coaches or players.
Yeah, I mean, a buddy of mine, Jeffrey, had only taught sports once said perception changes. It happens, especially in the world of college football. Things go up and down like a stock market.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think things have changed too now with the transfer portal and NIL, right? I mean, I think that's part of the reason a team like Indiana is even in our conversation here, because they've been able to utilize some of the new tools out there and things like that. So, yeah, I think if you're Ohio State, this is a big week, but you got to close out the season well too, and that obviously includes that Michigan game.
Well, and before we go, there's one more key for Ohio State to get a victory against Penn State. The running game's obviously going to have to go up because it was quite down last week against Nebraska. And I'm looking at the stats, and good God Almighty, 64 total yards combined, rushing yards. You can't have those yards against Penn State.
No, it was weird because Ohio State's run the ball pretty well this season. And look, some of it certainly had to do with the offensive line play, as we touched on. But 10 carries each for Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson, about where they've been. Just neither of them were able to do much, hit the big play. Travion Henderson did have a 15-yard run early in the game that I thought was going to kind of get things going, but a lot of times they're running into either like the back of their own offensive lineman, or it's 1 or 2 yards. It was just kind of uncharacteristic. Like I said, it was a weird game overall for the offense. And I just think they struggled to ever get into a groove. And obviously running the football is about finding that rhythm, right? And, you tend to wear teams down, and that's when you start to hit the bigger plays. And Ohio State was never able to do that. It will certainly be important to establish the run and stick with it against Penn State, again, on the road in what will be a wild atmosphere, even though it's a noon game. If you're the Buckeyes, you have to establish that run, get the run game going, and stick with it, like I said, because you can't just throw the ball all over and expect to win in Happy Valley.
Yeah, I mean, I know I want to hear Gus Johnson go over in the middle. Oh, touchdown.
Yeah, they'll need it. And look, a lot of times under Ryan Day, it's been passing to set up the run, but Chip Kelly is much more of a run first guy. So I think you need to find that happy balance between the two of them, right? And the Buckeyes have been able to do it up until this past weekend against Nebraska. So if you're a Buckeye fan, you hope that's sort of a 1 week blip, and then you get things corrected, especially if you can get the offensive line figured out. At least it's not going to be perfect, but at least enough to get you through that game.
Well, it's going to be awesome seeing more of the teacher and the protege working more together. That's going to be awesome. And before we go, you got some magic going on at Bucknuts247, and some much more magic involving, like, you're talking a little bit about Manchester United. Like, I saw the other day you had that shirt on. Like, I got to be real, I know next to nothing about it. So one of these days I'll have to talk to you about Manchester United. Where can they talk to you if they want to learn more about the Buckeyes and Manchester United and plenty of other sports, matter of fact?
Yeah. You can follow me. Mostly I'm on Twitter or X. I still call it Twitter. I do some stuff on Instagram, though not nearly as much. Same name. You can see them there on the screen, _Pat_Murphy. Yeah. And then over on Bucknuts or 247 Sports, we have, plenty of content. And obviously this week, a big one. We'll have lots of stuff from that. We get Ryan Day and the coordinators tomorrow and players on Wednesday. So it's a busy week.
There we go. And of course, you can check me out on Jackson Johnson 979, where you will see some episodes of the Jacksonian right here on YouTube and on Jackson VOCFB on X. And I can tell you right now, you can also tune in the Pits Analysis Show from Sports Talk with Austin and myself Wednesday nights, and on the Final Whistle late Saturday nights, where Austin and I go over the takeaways from each of the games that happened during the week. And of course, for more updates on the Jacksonian and on Alabama at the Voice College Football for Crimson Tide Live Monday nights and the Crimson Tide call-in show, 9 p.m. Central Time, 10 p.m. Eastern Time, you can check out my updates on what's going on there on Jackson VOCFB on X and on Jackson Johnson 543908 on Instagram and Threads. And of course, Johnny Burtz and I will be discussing the playoff scenarios. Well, we have discussed the playoff scenarios. I forget. I'm at the evening, but I'm filming right now in the afternoon. Duh. But yeah, it's my show. I'm not gonna get in trouble in my own show. But anyway, so tune in to see Johnny Burtz and I talking about the recap of Alabama, Missouri, and the playoff scenarios for the Crimson Tide. And is there a scenario where we can go to the SEC title game? So tell your friends, your family, and the cashiers at Publix, Walmart, Kroger about the magic that I'm doing on Alabama at the Voice College Football and the magic that I'm doing on the Jacksonian. And don't forget to tell the cashiers at Kroger's about the magic that Patrick Murphy, Steve Hellwagon, and friends are creating at Bucknuts247. And with that, we wish y'all a happy Monday night. And stay safe, stay warm. It's cold out. Good day, everybody.